By the middle of the next day, the state would take her child away. The sentence lodged itself in Cindy Whitmer's mind like a bullet that refused to exit, endlessly repeating as she stood in the harsh fluorescent light of the roadside diner. Her phone slipped in her damp grip as her body shook, and beneath the rising panic, one single thought crystallized with terrifying clarity. By tomorrow, she must have a husband, or she would lose her son. She had no way of knowing that only a few steps behind her sat a man listening in silence, weighing whether to risk the empire he had built in the shadows, or stand aside and allow her little boy to disappear into the machinery of the system forever. Outside, the storm hammered the diner with relentless force. Sheets of rain slammed against the windows, turning the glass into a shifting gray wall and muting the lights of the highway beyond. The small restaurant felt cut off from the rest of the world, like an island surrounded by cold, violent water. Cindy hunched over the worn counter, knuckles white around her phone, as if the thin device represented the last fragile thread connecting her to everything she loved. On the other end of the line, the voice of the social services investigator, Miss Hartley, sounded precise and impersonal, the voice of someone who had long ago learned to deliver devastating news without letting it touch her. Every word fell with the weight of a stamped document. There was no kindness, no pause for breath or understanding, only policy and procedure. Cindy heard phrases like documented history of domestic violence, unstable housing environment, lack of a family structure. Each phrase stacked on the previous one like bricks in a wall being built around her. A judge had already reviewed the situation. A ruling had been given. Unless Cindy could present proof of legal marriage and permanent residence by noon the next day, her son would be removed and placed into protective custody. 14 hours. That was all she had been given. No house, no spouse, no child. The call ended with a dull, decisive click that felt louder than the storm. Cindy pulled the phone from her ear and stared blindly at the reflection in the rain-streaked glass. The woman looking back at her did not resemble the person she used to be. Her tan waitress uniform, with its frayed collar and faint grease stains, hung loosely on a frame that had lost too much weight too quickly. Her brown hair was pulled back into a ponytail that had surrendered to humidity and exhaustion, stray strands clinging to her damp forehead. Shadows pooled under her eyes. Her expression looked carved out, hollowed by fear and sleepless nights. Beyond the glass, in the dark parking lot, her aging sedan sat under the torrent. The car's back seat was crammed with blankets, clothes, a battered backpack, the few remnants of a life that had once been normal. For 3 weeks, that vehicle had been their bedroom, their refuge, their address. That was the only home she could offer her 6-year-old son. That was the stability she was about to be told was not good enough. The pain struck with such intensity that Cindy's body simply folded in itself. She did not shout at the universe or argue into the phone. Instead, she collapsed over the counter, pressing her forehead to the cold laminate as deep, raw sobs tore through her chest. The diner was almost empty. The storm had kept most customers away, leaving only a few scattered late-night souls and the humming of old appliances. There, in that thin wedge of isolation, Cindy's restraint broke. Between jagged breaths, she let the truth she had been holding back escape into the open air. She needed a miracle. She needed a husband and a roof over their heads by morning, or she would lose her baby. Her miracle sat directly behind her, but to Cindy, he was just another unseen stranger. In the booth along the wall, a man in a black suit looked up from his untouched coffee as her words reached him. They hit him with unexpected force, as if someone had driven a fist into his chest. He had not intended to stop at this particular diner. It was simply a place to wait out a law enforcement checkpoint further down the highway, a familiar and practiced maneuver for a person whose identity appeared more often in confidential briefings than in photo albums. He sat with his back to the wall, habit rather than preference. His build was powerful but contained, every movement economical. The black suit he wore had the sheen of something expensive, yet it was worn without a tie, the open collar revealing the edges of elaborate tattoos along his throat and chest. Dark designs wound over his hands and knuckles, old symbols and marks of allegiance that formed a language of loyalty, violence, and debt paid in full. His hair was slicked back, emphasizing the hard line of his jaw. His face was not cruel, but there was nothing soft about it either. It carried the stillness of someone who had seen a great deal and had trained himself never to flinch. In certain circles he was known as the Black Ledger, a man who did not just balance accounts, but closed them permanently. Conflicts that dragged on for years ended once he became involved, not with public spectacle, but with quiet, unseen pressure. Entire districts answered to him without knowing his name. All of it had been built upon a single personal law. Never involve innocent people, never touch families, never pull those who still had a chance at peace into the gravity of his world. Yet as he listened to Cindy's broken voice, heard the way she spoke the word baby as if it were the only word left that meant anything, that law trembled. Something old and buried moved inside him. For a moment, his gaze dropped to the cold coffee and the rain-distorted light beyond the window, and memory rose uninvited. He saw again a cramped room full of men in tailored suits, their hands resting comfortably on polished wooden tables. He heard his mother's voice begging those men for help, watched them look at her with mild irritation, as though she were an inconvenience they were forced to endure. He remembered standing behind her legs at 7 years old, listening to her plead with people who had the power to save her and who chose silence instead. He had never forgotten the look in her eyes at the moment she realized no one would come. He heard that same echo now in Cindy's choked plea to the empty room. His jaw tightened, his fingers stilled completely on the table. The woman at the counter shook as she tried to gather herself, unaware of the attention fixed upon her. She had no idea that there was someone in that diner who could alter the course of her life with a single decision. He, on the other hand, understood exactly what stood to be lost. He rose from the booth with deliberate calm. The motion was smooth, economical, practiced. His footsteps were nearly silent on the worn floor as he crossed the short distance to the counter. Cindy kept her head bowed, wiping at her face with a flimsy napkin that did little to stop the flow of tears. Her breath hitched and stuttered. The storm roared beyond the windows. Inside, time seemed to hold its breath. A low, controlled voice reached her from just beside her shoulder. He said he could be the husband she needed. For a long second, her mind refused to process the meaning of the sentence. Exhaustion, fear, and adrenaline twisted together until she wondered if she had finally snapped. Then she turned her head and saw him. He stood only a few feet away, tall, dressed in black, the ink on his throat visible above his open collar. His gaze held an intensity that pinned her in place, dark and unwavering. His hands rested loosely at his sides, body relaxed but ready. Every part of him radiated danger, from the precision of his posture to the quiet way he occupied space, as if he were used to owning any room he walked into. Fear flared first, hot and instinctive. Men who looked like this did not stroll into a person's life to offer help without price. Everything about him screamed risk, yet his eyes did not hold ridicule. There was no pity there either. What she saw instead was a kind of cold focus, as if he had already made some internal calculation and was now simply waiting for her to catch up. Her voice emerged as a hoarse whisper, asking whether he was joking. He did not repeat the offer, did not soften it. He answered that he did not joke, and the simplicity of the statement carried more conviction than any shouted promise could have. The absence of any attempt to charm her made it harder to dismiss him. Cindy's fingers curled around the edge of the counter to steady herself as she stared at him, trying to reconcile what he was saying with the reality she knew. She insisted that she did not know him, that he did not know her, asked why a stranger would even consider something like this. The words felt ridiculous even as she spoke them. He sat down on the stool beside her, his movements precise, utterly unhurried. Up close, she noticed additional details, small things that made him seem even more dangerous. There was a thin scar running along his jaw, a faint line that might have been left by a knife or a bullet. The ink on his neck vanished under the fabric of his shirt, suggesting more hidden beneath. His eyes were dark, but there was an old tiredness in them, a weight beyond immediate anger or impatience. He agreed that the idea sounded insane. He added, almost casually, that madness did not necessarily mean impossibility. Cindy released a short, broken laugh that had no humor in it. She told him people did not appear out of nowhere and rescue women like her. Life did not work that way. Most people walked past, looked away, pretended not to see. He answered that most people did exactly that. Then he added that he was not most people. Again, there was no boast in the words, only fact. She tried to study him, searching for any obvious sign that he was intoxicated, delusional, or playing some cruel joke. The truth, unfortunately, was worse. He appeared completely sober, entirely serious. His suit was the kind that did not come off clearance racks. The watch on his wrist looked understated but expensive. He had the bearing of a man accustomed to being obeyed. None of that made her feel better. When she asked who he was, he told her only that he was someone who could help. Right now, he said, that was all she needed to know. She protested that this was not an answer. He replied that, for tonight, it was the only answer that mattered. Her instinct screamed at her to get up, to run, to flee both him and the impossible choice hanging over her. But run where? Back to a car in the rain with a sleeping child and a countdown ticking in her head. Her next question came out raw and unsteady. Why would he do this? Why would a man like him risk anything for a stranger who had nothing to offer? Silence stretched between them. His jaw tightened, and a flicker of something, pain, anger, memory, passed through his gaze and was gone again. When he finally answered, his voice had lowered further. He said he knew what happened when nobody helped. Those few words carried an entire story. Cindy could feel it even if she did not know the details. She sensed old wounds beneath his composed exterior, some past moment where help had been withheld and a line had been crossed that could never be uncrossed. A shiver worked its way down her spine. Without meaning to, she believed him. She stammered that she could not pay him. There was no savings account, no hidden stash, nothing for him to gain. Everything she owned fit into the back seat of a car and a handful of grocery bags. He answered that he was not asking for money. She pressed harder, demanded to know what he did want, because in her experience, favors always came with invisible hooks. His focus sharpened as he considered her. It did not feel like he was deciding whether she was worth helping. It felt like he was assessing whether she could survive the consequences of accepting. Finally, he laid it out in stark terms. The next day, she would walk into the courtroom with a marriage certificate, a confirmed address, and a husband prepared to stand beside her while the judge made an evaluation. Once the custody issue was resolved, she would be free to leave. No binding promises beyond that, no debt, no standing obligation. Just a contract of convenience designed to keep her child where he belonged. It sounded like a trap simply because life had trained her to expect traps. She said as much, insisting that no one simply gave away something so large, so life-altering, without demanding something in return. He replied that there was no hidden catch, only conditions. He listed them with the same calm he had used for everything else. She would not ask about his work. She would not entangle herself with whatever business he conducted. She would remain in the house he would place her in until the court decided about custody. After that, her path would be her own. Her thoughts spun. The idea of staying in a stranger's home made her stomach twist. She asked why she would ever consider staying beyond the hearing. He answered without offense that she might discover she felt safer there than she had in years, but he repeated that the choice would remain hers. She searched his expression for even a glimmer of manipulation, but all she could see was that same restrained stillness. He was not begging her to accept. He was not promising that this would fix everything. He was simply placing an option in front of her and refusing to push. She told him again that the entire situation was madness. He calmly agreed. She added that she should refuse. He agreed with that as well, but noted that she would not. When she demanded to know how he could be so certain, he answered that she was not truly afraid of him. The thing that terrified her sat somewhere else entirely. She feared the image of her son's small hand being pulled out of hers, the sound of doors closing in government offices, the hollow echo of an empty car. Fear like that, he said, was a force that could move a person further than they ever believed they could go. In that moment, the truth of his words cut through the fog of panic. Images of her boy filled her mind. Messy curls, missing teeth in his smile. The way he whispered that he was not scared of the dark as long as she was nearby. She pictured him in a stranger's living room with unfamiliar toys and forced routines. His questions met with tired answers from overworked staff or new foster parents who had never seen the life they had fled. She thought of him asking for his mother and being told he could not see her. The idea was unbearable. Faced with that, the risk of stepping into this man's world suddenly felt, if not safe, then at least survivable. So the beginning of the bargain formed there in a near-empty diner, under flickering lights and the hammering of rain. A desperate mother, out of time and out of options. A man with a past carved in shadow and a rule he had just chosen to break. Two paths that should never have crossed, now bent toward each other because a system designed to protect had instead cornered the innocent until they had no choice left at all.